Okay, think about your local church building for a second. You probably picture Sunday mornings, right? Services, maybe some hymns.
Yeah, the usual Sunday scene.
But have you ever walked past during the week and wondered, what actually goes on in there? Sometimes there's a lot happening behind those doors.
It's true. There's often this whole other life to the building.
What's the real story beyond Sunday worship?
Well, it's quite a shift that's been happening almost under the radar. If you go back, say, to Victorian times, churches were really seen as sacred spaces, almost only for worship.
Pretty strict view back then.
Very. But now we're seeing this big move towards much more flexible use. Churches are increasingly becoming these 7-day-a-week community centers.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. We're looking at a source called church community centers.
Right.
And we want to explore this often kind of overlooked role these centers play. I think you might actually be quite surprised by their impact on community connection, social capital, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's significant.
We'll look at how churches manage this bigger role, the challenges, and also the opportunities that come up. It's fascinating stuff.
Definitely. Our goal here is to really understand the foundational work these church community centers are doing. What's the thinking behind them developing this way? What's their impact?
Okay, let's get into it. One of the first things that really jumped out at me from the source is how much we just take it for granted.
Take what for granted?
That church halls and centers are just there.
Yeah.
For all sorts of community uses, formal groups, spontaneous meetups, weddings, birthday parties.
Ah, right. They just seem to absorb all this activity.
Yeah. And the source points out that actually churches have often been remarkably successful at running these places.
More successful sometimes than, say, local authorities or even resident groups trying to do the same thing. It's a really important contribution to local life, but it often goes unnoticed.
But then here's the kicker, isn't it? The source really drills down on this central question. How does this openness, this generosity, how does it actually align with the church's core mission?
It's a real tension.
It feels like it. You want to offer that hospitality, that open-handed and unconditional welcome the source talks about,
without necessarily having a hidden agenda or expecting a specific church outcome in return.
Yeah. But how is it perceived? That's the tricky bit. Even if the intention is purely about service.
The community walking past might interpret it differently. They might not see it as the church, being the church, just, renting out space.
This is where that idea of symbolic interactionism comes in.
Exactly. It's all about how we interpret symbols and actions. The source gives this cautionary tale.
Oh, yeah, the church that did major renovations.
That's the one. They poured money into making it a great community facility, but they kind of lost their own identity in the process.
How so?
Well, the traditional church, symbols, the notice board outside, maybe the railings, things people subconsciously recognize, they got completely overshadowed by all the bright, colorful banners and signs from the groups using the center. So the unintended message became something like,
this isn't really a church anymore. It's just a hall for hire.
Precisely. The dominant visual cues were secular, not sacred.
So the church leadership might be thinking, great, we've lowered the threshold, made it more welcoming.
Be more accessible for the community.
But people walking by might just see it as, I don't know, the church retreating, or maybe just trying to make money from rent.
Or even just handing over the keys, effectively. It's about impression management, as the source puts it.
And avoiding those unmeant gestures, the things that accidentally send the wrong signal.
Yeah. Instead of saying, we're active, we're here for you, the changes could inadvertently suggest decline or absence.
So how do they fix that? What practical things can churches do to make sure their active involvement is clear, that it still feels like a church space?
Well, the source suggests architects have a big role to play, thinking consciously about integrating those high symbols of the church.
The recognizable visual elements.
Into the everyday community areas, not keeping them separate. Maybe more open plan designs could help blend the spaces.
That makes sense. So it doesn't feel like sacred space here, secular space there.
Right, and signage is crucial, but not just any signage.
What kind then?
It needs to be customized, both inside and out. The signs should somehow carry the church's signature, its identity.
So beyond just saying room 1 this way.
Yeah. It needs to convey that implicit message. The church is the host, the one actively holding the space for everyone. It's a subtle but important distinction.
This leads nicely into another point the source raises, which is about the word services.
Yes, that term can mean very different things.
How so?
Well, for most organizations, services means, the products or activities they deliver, what they do. You see banners advertising specific programs.
Okay.
But for a church, traditionally, services primarily means worship services, Sunday morning type things.
Right. But the source suggests maybe reframing that, thinking about church services more broadly.
Exactly. Moving beyond just listing worship times or study groups,
Yeah.
thinking about the more fundamental human outcomes,
Like what?
like creating spaces where people can explore different perspectives or helping kids think about values or just building that sense of community belonging, foundational stuff.
So maybe the banners could reflect that more instead of just Yoga Class Tuesday.
Precisely. The source even suggests alternative slogans focusing on things like connection, well-being, finding meaning, the broader humanizing work the church enables through the center.
Okay, interesting. And to kind of embody this broader engagement, the source introduces a specific role, the community chaplain.
Yeah, this is a really innovative idea. It's a new kind of ministry, often carried out by trained volunteers, designed specifically for these community center contexts.
And what's the goal of this chaplain?
There are sort of four main aims mentioned. One is gently encouraging people using the center to explore spiritual questions if they want to.
Okay.
Another is integrating the Sunday life of the church with all the weekday activity, making those connections.
Bridging the gap.
Yes. And third, presenting the center itself as a new way the church is present and active in the community. And finally, just generally building community identity and connection within the center.
So it's not like replacing the vicar or priest.
No, definitely not. The source is clear. It's about being a kind of priest for the everyday.
Representing God's presence in the midst of ordinary life.
Something like that. And crucially, the focus is on ministering to the groups that use the center, not primarily individual pastoral care. That avoids replicating the traditional clergy role or becoming just another counselor.
Got it. So what does a community chaplain actually do day to day?
It's varied, making regular informal visits to groups, just being around, listening, maybe offering prayer support if it feels right,
Okay.
knowing where to refer people if deeper pastoral issues come up, helping organize inclusive events the source mentions, focusing on fun and laughter, which is nice,
Yeah.
keeping an ear to the ground about community issues, maybe facilitating what the source calls apt liturgy, simple, relevant moments of reflection or prayer in that setting,
Apt liturgy. Interesting phrase.
and linking the different groups, connecting the Sunday folks with the weekday users, hosting reflective events during the week too.
It sounds like a really relational role.
Yeah,
And the source stresses the need for proper training.
absolutely essential.
Yeah.
Because it requires specific skills and sensitivities. And speaking of sensitivities, the source goes into quite some depth about anxiety.
Anxiety in the community.
Yeah, how it's often quite high and how that impacts everything. There's this inverse relationship. Apparently, more anxiety means less trust, less social capital.
Makes sense. When people are anxious, they react more, right?
Exactly. More reaction, less thoughtful response. It can fuel scapegoating, division.
Yeah.
It really erodes a community's resilience and makes leadership much harder.
And it even affects the ability to just relax and have fun together.
Right. And the source points out how easily careless communication, even unintentional stuff, can trigger these negative anxiety cycles.
So the community chaplain, or anyone working in these settings really, needs to be aware of this.
Very aware. They need to act as a sort of step-down transformer for anxiety, to model a calmer, more contained way of being.
How do you do that? The source mentions 4 habits.
Yes. 4 things to cultivate. First, being aware of your own reactive buttons, what pushes your anxiety levels up.
Self-awareness. Okay.
Second, trying to see the bigger picture, understanding that problems usually have multiple causes, a systems approach, basically. Avoids blaming.
Right. Don't just jump to simple answers.
Third, consciously resisting the urge to absorb other people's anxiety while you're listening to them. You can be empathetic without taking it all on yourself.
That sounds hard.
It is. And fourth, using humor and fun appropriately. That quote from Peter Berger about laughter being a rumor of angels. It suggests humor can diffuse tension.
I like that. Rumor of angels.
Yeah.
And then there's this idea of developing a non-anxious presence.
That's key. It involves being able to sort of mentally log your own anxiety and park it temporarily so you can be fully present for others without projecting your own stuff. And There's even a physical aspect mentioned, consciously softening your eyes. Apparently, it links to Buddhist practices, and it's like the calming effect you get looking at a baby. It signals openness, non-threat.
Interesting. So beyond anxiety management, what other skills does this chaplain need?
Well, a deep respect for the autonomy of the groups is vital, not trying to take over or control them. It connects to that Adam Smith idea of empathy, really trying to see it from their perspective.
Balancing sympathy with boundaries.
Exactly. Building trust before jumping in with offers of help. The source talks about that porous and delicate membrane between genuine care and unwelcome control.
So it's definitely not ministry in the sense of trying to shape people's beliefs directly.
No, that's a clear distinction. It's chaplaincy being alongside, supporting, not directing belief.
Which brings us to that very sensitive area. How and when do you actually introduce faith, if at all?
Yeah, the source handles this carefully. It really comes down to the chaplain's own maturity and integrity.
How so?
It suggests speaking from vulnerability, from your own experience, not preaching, but witnessing from a position of shared human weakness, maybe sharing how faith helped you through a tough time. That builds trust.
Okay, that makes sense.
And finding natural opportunities to offer or invite prayer, making it feel normal, not forced. Like if someone mentions an illness, offering to pray for them.
That's a simple offer.
Yeah. Prayer can be that bridge the source suggests, moving God from being a distant idea to someone who is alongside us in the everyday stuff.
So if a church was looking for someone for this role,
Mm-hmm.
what's the ideal profile? The source gives a kind of checklist, doesn't it?
Sort of a person specification, yeah. Someone who creates an upbeat, warm atmosphere, good at building relationships, someone with a faith that's, been tested but is still questioning, still growing, comfortable being vulnerable, absolutely trustworthy with confidentiality.
Practical skills, too.
Yes, event organizing, hosting reflective sessions, and crucially, maintaining those boundaries we talked about, plus the time commitment, obviously.
And the source suggests maybe having a team of chaplains.
Yeah, that seems wise. For mutual support.
Yeah.
And definitely regular supervision, a space to talk through tricky boundary issues, pastoral dilemmas, maybe dodgy relationships, opportunities for that apt liturgy, and how to integrate everything.
This whole discussion really makes you reconsider those groups using the center, doesn't it? The source asks this really challenging question.
Are these groups in some way also congregations?
Exactly. It pushes the boundaries of what we think a congregation is.
It does. The example given is an oasis group, like a holiday-at-home club for older people. It might only happen occasionally,
Episodic support rather than weekly.
but it can still create a real sense of belonging, even a spiritual connection for some, linked to the church, providing the space and support.
And the chaplain's role there.
Could be supporting the volunteer coordinators,
Right.
networking, just chatting with participants, maybe casually asking about prayer needs, helping evaluate, plugging gaps, even finding funding, being that supportive presence.
It's about seeing the potential for spiritual connection within those groups, not just trying to pull people out of them into the Sunday service.
Precisely. Blurring the lines. Recognizing these groups can develop their own spiritual dimension and feel part of the wider church network.
And maybe the fact they're episodic isn't a weakness.
Could be a strength, less pressure, something to look forward to. The chaplain helps foster that sense of significance, making prayer feel normal and okay to talk about.
And perhaps over time, people might naturally become curious about other church activities, or even feel moved to contribute financially.
It's possible. The source concludes by suggesting that maybe the sharp distinction we often make between these weekday community groups and the Sunday congregation, maybe it's more in our heads, a failure of imagination, as it puts it.
Wow. Okay, so pulling this all together from our deep dives into church community centers, it's clear these places play a huge, often quite hidden role.
Definitely. We've seen the complexity, that tightrope walk between open hospitality and church mission.
Yeah, and how important careful communication and symbolism are, getting that impression management right.
And then this really creative potential of the community chaplain role, connecting people, reducing anxiety, building that social fabric.
It really addresses community needs in a tangible way.
It does. Which leaves us with a final thought, perhaps, for you listening.
Go on.
Given everything we've talked about, the hospitality, the intentional engagement, the anxiety reduction, how might these principles apply outside of a church context?
You mean in other community spaces, like a library or...
Yeah, or a community association, maybe even a co-working space. Could they adapt some of these ideas about welcome, about presence, about subtly strengthening connections.
Hmm. How could they foster that social fabric in their own ways?
Exactly. It makes you think about all the unseen work that might be happening or could be happening in the ordinary spaces in your own neighborhood.
That's a great question to ponder. It certainly gives you a new lens to look through.
Right.
We hope this encourages you to think about your own local community spaces, maybe the role of faith groups near you.
Maybe just observe your local church or community center next time you pass by and think about what might really be going on inside.
Definitely food for thought.